Welcome to the Zeem webinar studio. Today, we're going to take a look at one of the most important relationships to the sustainability of the association. That's the relationship between the CEO and the board. Ideally, this is a healthy, two-way partnership that is seamless and friction-free. Today, I'm going to share with you some strategies to build and maintain a strong and positive CEO board working relationship. For those of you who are regular attendees at our webinars, you know that we host these webinars to give you timely, valuable information that you can take back to your association and use immediately. These webinars also give us an opportunity to help you see some of the work that we do. So when you're looking for help, you'll think of us. So, why does this matter? Well, the CEO and the board are a team, at least they're meant to be. And you can put in any sort of sports analogy here that you can imagine. But the reality is, if we're not playing our roles, the team's never going to get a win. When there is poor alignment between the CEO and the board, there is friction. And friction costs. It costs resources. It costs emotional intelligence and time. It costs intellectual time and sometimes physical time as well when people don't know what they're doing and they're potentially doing the wrong things because they don't have the right direction. Anytime you've got friction, it's going to impact on your results because you've got resources that are actually being wasted. And the outcome in the worst case could be that the CEO is actually weakened and not able to fully perform their job, or they're potentially gone. So that's why it matters. Now, what does success look like? If we have a thriving CEO board relationship, what does that look like? It means there's a real bond between the CEO and the board. And that's not just that we're bonding over our politics or the sports teams that we follow. It's about a bond where we really feel that we're part of the same mission and we all have our respective and important team roles in order to accomplish that. It means that our board meetings are effective and efficient. We get the job done. It is a dream to go through the board meetings. Everything just runs so smoothly. It means also that the board has effectively delegated what it is appropriate to delegate to the CEO and staff, and they have the appropriate amount of oversight for those things that they've delegated. It also means high productivity for both the board from a governance perspective and high productivity for the CEO. So that's what success looks like. We can accomplish so many things so much more easily if we're all on the same page, we're all moving in the same direction, and we all know exactly what our individual contribution needs to be in order to make that happen. So what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to start right back at the beginning. We're going to start right from onboarding the new CEO. What should happen when a new CEO comes into the organization? Now, at the very end, I'm also going to go right back to the beginning on the director side and talk about recruiting directors to get the right people in to make sure that you can have that thriving relationship. And in between that, we'll talk about the CEO-director relationships. How can we build and maintain those? How can we make sure that everybody knows their role, that the CEO is clear on their role and the board is clear on their role? We're going to talk about agendas, the facilitator's best friend, and meeting management. We're going to talk about board motivation and engagement, because at the end of the day, in order to have a thriving relationship, everybody needs to be enthused about the tasks and the opportunities that they have in front of them. So let's start with onboarding the CEO. Really what we've got here is a few areas that we have to focus on. If we've got a brand new CEO, what we need is a documented onboarding plan. Now, if you don't have a documented onboarding plan for your next CEO, I really encourage you to do it now, because this is something that takes time. If you're going to do it right, it's not something you just assign to somebody to whip off in 24 hours. So it's going to take time. You don't want to be spending time on this when your CEO is about to walk in the door. So if you don't have one now, just like having a crisis management plan, it's the kind of thing you want to have ready to go in the cupboard. You pull it off, dust it off when you're ready to use it and get going very quickly. So you need to have the plan. Now, in that plan, you want to have a plan for what is the board's role in onboarding the CEO, and what is the staff member's role in onboarding the CEO. So you need both elements there, and you need to be clear who exactly is accountable for what. Now, I just want to throw in here, this is my direction to you if you're on the board of directors. If you are a CEO and a new CEO, and you walk in the door and it becomes clear that there is no onboarding plan, then that's got to be one of the first things that you consider, because perhaps the most important thing for you, for your success as a new CEO, is to understand the big picture. Who are the players? What's the point of view? How do things work here? Those are things that you really need to be trained in. And if the board doesn't have a plan to provide that, then you, in a nice and respectful way, need to make sure that that actually happens. So let's talk about what should be in the onboarding plan from the board's perspective. The board needs to have a role in this because the board knows things in a way that the staff doesn't know anywhere near as intimately. Chances are people on staff have not been at every single board meeting. They certainly haven't been at the in-camera meetings. And it's really important that you hear these things from the board's perspective. So first of all, you want to hear from the board what's going on with the strategic plan. Why did the board come up with the objectives that they've got in the strategic plan? Make sure that there's a little bit of background provided to the CEO as to why these were the 3 or 5 most important things that we wanted to focus on. Make sure that in the plan, there is a good briefing on where we are with respect to our progress on the strategic plan. How are we doing with the strategic plan? Are we where we should be at this point in time, or do we really need some remedial action here? What kind of governance model do we use? And by that, I don't mean, oh, we use Robert's rules or we use the Carver model. I mean, how do decisions actually get made? In reality, when we say we use the Carver model or policy governance or Robert's rules, the reality is I've noticed that most of the time what that really means is we use just a super watered down, highly diluted version of that model. So really, for most boards, the governance model that they're using is quite specific to them. So what you want to do is to make sure that the CEO knows how decisions get made and what the process is. And then finally, you want to make sure that the CEO is taken out by individual directors to meet with all of your key stakeholders. It's really important to start that relationship building process early. And if you've got a director who's already got a strong relationship with that stakeholder and they take the CEO out and introduce them, it's a much easier conversation and it helps to get the conversation started much, much quicker. In-person is definitely best. There's no question about it. But if you can't do that, at least do it by a Zoom and Teams so you can actually see each other. And as the CEO, you should be making it a priority to, as soon after you get started, to get out and do those in-person meetings as well. So that's the board's role in onboarding the CEO. Now let's talk about building and maintaining those relationships. Now, at the end of the day, if you're on the board of directors, it's important that you're part of helping to make this happen. But really, the initiative here typically is going to come from the CEO. Now, what I recommend is that the CEO builds in regular pre-scheduled contact points with both the president and the treasurer, and ad hoc but regular contact, one-on-one contact with the directors. The purpose in these conversations is to do business, make sure that we're not wasting anybody's time, but also to take the opportunity to stoke the fires of passion of the volunteers that you're talking to. Find out, why did they join the board in the first place? What do they really, really care about? And stoke that passion. And also pump their tires as well, too. We're all human beings, and especially in a volunteer role, it really, really helps if someone tells us we're doing a good job and why they value us. And be sincere about it. Don't just tell me, Erin, you're doing a good job. Say, Erin, you're doing a good job because you're really good at this. That makes it believable and it makes it sink in. So make sure you're doing part of that cheerleading while you're having those conversations. Now, with the president, I definitely recommend weekly calls. And I'm talking about just a few minutes here, 5 to 15 minutes. You want to make sure that you're being very respectful of their time and they know they can get in and out of there very quickly. If they're feeling that they've got an hour booked every week, that's just way too much. And you're going to find that over time, they're starting to cancel the meetings or just not show up at the meetings. Make sure that you're using the time wisely. Make sure that you've booked it at a regularly scheduled time, the same day of the week, the same time, at a time when it's highly unlikely that either of you should have to cancel. I personally like 8 a.m. because you don't get a lot of meetings at that time. Not everybody's going to be happy with that, but find something that's going to work for both of you, something that almost certainly is not going to end up with a double booking. Make sure that when you get into that meeting, you are prepared as the CEO. You know exactly what you're going to talk about. You get it off your chest quickly, you're organized, and it gives them an opportunity to respond. Then give them an opportunity to provide anything that they want to talk to you about. And keep in mind, this isn't an opportunity to just kind of have a good old chin wag about personal information. You're not here to talk to them about how your holidays were. If that comes up in conversation and they want to talk about it, fine. You're there to listen to your president and build those bonds. But this is supposed to be a quick, rapid fire opportunity to talk about the things that matter, and also to keep in mind that you as a CEO are constantly doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes that nobody sees. And they don't want to see it. I mean, let's face it, that's why they've delegated it to you. But keep in mind that what they don't see, they don't necessarily know. They may not realize that that assignment that the board gave to you at the last board meeting is actually incredibly complicated and incredibly time consuming. And this is an opportunity to do a touch point with the president and say, you know, that assignment I've got, here's what's going on. Or is that something that you think the board was expecting it was going to take that amount of time? Or here's the roadblock I've run into. What do you think? What's your advice? Use the opportunity to make sure that the president is up to speed on what's going on in the background. By having those weekly meetings, it means that they are constantly up to speed on anything that's going on. Now, in terms of your treasurer, I recommend talking less frequently, but I still recommend that you talk on a monthly basis. Even if your board meetings are only quarterly, you don't want to wait until the quarter is passed before you have any conversation with your treasurer at all. You want to make sure that with your treasurer, you are discussing the monthly financial statements as they are produced. And you want to make sure that as the CEO, you're having that conversation with your CFO. Now, this is really important. It's important that you have your CFO at the table because they're the ones that know the details, because they are a financial professional and they're going to be able to answer questions that you as a CEO won't be able to answer and needn't be able to answer. But it's really important that you as a CEO are there at those calls because you need to be able to make the treasurer understand what are the big picture things that they need to be focusing on and reporting to the board. Now, I often see a situation where it comes time for the treasurer to do their report and they're just kind of winging it and they don't really know. And then they go to the CEO, is there anything that you want to add here? And they're obviously struggling. Your job here in these monthly meetings is to make sure that they know everything they need to know to report back to the board and look good in the process. Now, there's a couple of reasons for doing this. Number one, it helps to engage your CFO and they want to look good. So it's going to help them feel positive and confident about delivering that report. But also keep in mind, this is getting your treasurer on side. You don't want to ever have your treasurer blindsided with things. And if the treasurer gets into the board meeting and it's going to be a difficult conversation, you want the treasurer to have the confidence to be able to speak to that difficult conversation and to be able to run it without punting it back over the net to the CEO. It's really important that you're coming across as a team because no matter how many times the CEO says things and no matter how much the directors trust the CEO, if you've got somebody else that they trust saying the same thing, singing from the same hymn book, that gives them more confidence that the message is accurate. So make sure that your treasurer is well briefed, that they're definitely on the same page, and that they feel comfortable giving the report and managing difficult conversations when they need to do it. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, when you have the monthly call, you're not going to run through the financial statements on a line-by-line basis and read the numbers out to them. That's not what you're there for. What you're there to do is to give them the big picture. Here are the big picture things we need to be focusing on from a financial perspective. Now, here's where you look in the financial statements to see that information. This is the line item you want to be looking at in order to track that trend and see how it's evolving. So start with a narrative of the big picture. Here's the things that I want you to know. Here's the things that I want you to be aware of to report back to the board. Maybe we need some feedback from the board in these areas. Now, here's where you look in the financial statements. Here's how the financial statements are telling you that information. If your treasurer is a financial person, you won't need to explain that to them. But often, especially when you're in a situation where you are a professional association or an industry association, where your people tend to have certain specific backgrounds, there's a really good chance that your treasurer may not have a financial background. So in that case, you're going to have to help them to start to understand and be able to navigate through financial statements. It is true that you can have good treasurers that don't start off as financial people. So don't assume that that's an impediment to bringing somebody in as a treasurer. It doesn't mean that because somebody is an accountant, they're going to make a better treasurer. And if you've got an accountant on your board, they might not want to be the treasurer. They might want to get away from their day-to-day work a little bit more when they join the board. Now, let's talk about building and maintaining the relationship with the directors. you want to make sure that when you're picking up the phone and talking to somebody, that they don't feel you've just picked up the phone to have a chin wag or to brag about all the wonderful things that you've done. Again, be respectful of your time. You are going to have pre-scheduled meetings with your treasurer and with your president. And by president, we mean chair. We're using the terms interchangeably. With directors, you've got to look for opportunities to have a meaningful conversation with them about something that is specific to their individual expertise or their individual insights. Keep in mind that your directors are all busy people. Just because it's convenient for you to pick up the phone and talk to them doesn't mean it's convenient for them. So unless you know that there's a good time to reach them, I encourage you to be respectful with an email ahead of time. I'd like to pick your brain on something. Do you have time tomorrow at around about this time? Book it in advance so they're ready for the call and they're able to give you their full attention. And make sure that you're asking them something that's specific to them. You know, Bob, I know you know a lot about this area, or I know you're really close to these particular stakeholders. I really want your input on this because here's a challenge that I'm having, or here's something that I heard and I want to check it out with you. Is this really true? Is it just a rumor? People like being asked for their expertise. There's nothing that most of us as human beings like more than talking about ourselves or something we know or something that we really care about. We can always find time to talk about that. And it helps to build a bond. It's surprising, you know, you could talk to somebody and they might spend 20 minutes doing nothing but talking and you're not even interacting except to say yes and good idea. And they'll get to the end of the call and go, thank you, that was a great call. And you're thinking, I didn't say anything. Well, it was a great call because you didn't say anything. It was because you just listened. So keep in mind on an ad hoc but regular basis, make sure that you've got reason to reach out to all of the directors. Now, we talked earlier about one of the biggest causes of friction is when people either don't know their rules or don't stay in their lanes. It amounts to the same thing. Now, if people choose not to stay in their lanes, that's more difficult to deal with. But at a minimum, let's make sure that they know what their lane is. Now, I know if you are a CEO or you've ever been on a board of directors where the CEO is constantly having to remind people on the board of the directors that, wait a minute, this is an operations topic. Let's move back up and let's focus on governance and the high level and strategy. I often see situations where CEOs are so frustrated that they have to keep reminding their board of directors. And every time they say it, the board of directors, you can almost see them do an eye roll up to the back of their heads. And you can hear them saying in their minds, oh, for Pete's sake, Mom, we know that. Well, yeah, the thing is, we do know that. But the challenge is that individual situations, it can be hard to tell whether we've actually strayed into operations or governance, because sometimes it really makes sense to have a conversation this deep on an operational matter, just enough to give the board the right amount of information that they need for appropriate oversight. What then becomes complicated is stopping them from drilling down to here. And that's why I feel we often have a challenge for the board to understand that they've strayed too far into operations. So how do we get around it? We get around it with board training. And I encourage you to think about two things with respect to board training, three things actually. Number one, case studies. It takes practice to figure out what is governance and what is operations. And case studies can really help with that. Give people examples, real life examples of where you need to stop and where the board needs to stop itself when it's drilling too far down into operations. Annually, for sure. If somebody has potentially a 6-year tenure on the board of directors and you only give them training when they first come out, there is no way that's enough. Make sure that everybody's getting annual training, and make sure that for the more seasoned directors, you're not just giving the same basic governance 101 stuff as you would give to the new directors. Make sure that those are more seasoned are getting more interesting and more challenging governance training as time goes by. And make sure it's not the CEO that's doing the training. Remember, as the CEO, you've got skin in the game. And I know for small organizations, sometimes it's really difficult to figure out how to do anything but that. But the reality is, it's kind of like, you know, being somebody's parent or being somebody's kid. The closeness of that relationship tends to impinge upon the credibility of governance training. So when the CEO is doing the governance training, you could find that some of the directors are tuning out because they're thinking, well, they're just talking their book. I mean, they're talking about that because that's important to them, not because that's really necessarily a governance best practice. So if you have a third party, wherever that third party comes from, free or paid, it really helps from a credibility perspective. So let's assume that we've onboarded the CEO, we know our roles, the CEO and the board are working well in order to build bonds with each other. What else can we do to make sure that this is a really friction-free and seamless relationship? I can't say enough about how important agendas are to a smoothly functioning board CEO relationship, and indeed to board work overall. If you get really good agendas put together, it deals with a whole lot of stuff that only occurs because you don't have a good agenda. So I cannot emphasize enough, if you take away nothing other than this, and you don't have good agendas right now, believe me, this is really going to help. So here's our checklist for what we need for a good agenda. First of all, and I encourage you to do this now, go back to your previous board agendas, just flip through a few of them and look at the agenda items. If you go through those agenda items, are the vast majority of them high level and strategic and governance oriented? If so, that's good. If you're flipping back through them and seeing, wow, we were dealing with a lot of operations stuff, is that because we're getting into a bad trend here, or was it just a phase we had to go through for one reason or another? Make sure that at least 80% of the agenda items on your agenda are high level, strategic, not operational. That in itself is going to go a long ways towards stopping the board from getting down into operations. Second thing is, make sure that every agenda item is timed so that the chair, the facilitator knows this is a 10-minute item, not a 30-minute item. And the number of minutes allocated toward it should reflect what the deliverable is. If it's a decision and a vote, you need more time rather than for information only. And it should also reflect the level of attention and commentary you want the board to put into it. So if you really need feedback, this is a tough issue, you're not going to have 5 minutes and move on to the next one. You're going to give it a lot more of that time. So that also gives the board members a clue that, oh, wow, this is an important consideration. I better make sure that I'm well up to speed on the background information that has been provided here. And keep in mind, you need to have good background information. People can't make informed decisions unless they've got that background information. So what I'd like to do is on agendas, not only do we have the timing for that particular agenda item, we've got the deliverable. And the deliverable is going to be information. That's all we need to do here. We're just giving the board information. Maybe it's information plus discussion, so we can do a little background digging. Maybe information, discussion, and decision. Maybe it's information, discussion, decision, and vote. So make sure that right on the agenda, the board knows this is what I need to do before I finish this agenda item. And it also tells the chair, your facilitator, that that's what they need to get from the board before they move on to the next agenda item. What I also like to do is for each agenda item, if there is background information in the board package, just make a little note there, a footnote or an asterisk that says, hey, there's background information here. You should be looking at the board package. Keep in mind with respect to the board package, make it easy on your director. Sometimes I see board packages where it just looks like, yeah, we've got a list of all these attachments and they're all relevant. We just chuck them together higgledy-piggledy and they're not in any order. Make sure that your board package, all of the backup material, is in the same order as you're going to be discussing it on the agenda. Make sure before the agenda goes out that you got input from your officers. Give them a draft of the agenda or ask them if there's anything that they particularly want to have on there. And make sure that you got the board package out well in advance. If you've got monthly meetings, you should be getting it out at least a week in advance so people have plenty of time. If they're monthly meetings, there's no point sending them out 2 weeks in advance because things are going to change in a week if you only have board meetings on a monthly basis. If you have board meetings quarterly and they're longer, maybe it's going to be a full day board meeting or maybe even a couple of days, you're going to want to make sure you get it out maybe earlier than a week in advance because there's going to be more for the board to digest. So make sure that you do something that's acceptable for you and works well for your board. Talk to your directors. Do they feel they've got enough time to read the board package right now? Is there a better way to do it? When was the last time you asked them that question? Now, when it comes to meeting management, remember there's agenda management and there's meeting management as well too. You want to make sure your chair really knows what they're doing as they're facilitating those board meetings. 2 of your biggest assets in terms of having effective meetings are the agenda, as I mentioned before, and having a good facilitator. Now, good facilitators are born, they're not voted. So, sorry, they're not born, they're not voted, they are made, they are trained. So nobody's going to come out of the womb being a great facilitator. If you're lucky enough to have a chair that's already got great facilitator training, that's awesome. If you don't, you may have somebody who's going to be great, but they need some training. Give them some facilitator training. If you've got time and you can send them out, that is a great perk. You know, I'm going to have to be the chair, I'm going to have to be the president. That's going to be more work, but they're sending me out for facilitator training. So I know no matter what, when my term as chair comes to an end, I'm going to be a good facilitator. That can be a perk to the job. And also, it can help people who might not be as confident stepping up to the plate to be a chair, to know that they're actually that training is available to them. Make sure that you've got tools and signals to know when you're heading down into a rabbit hole and pulling that thing up again and putting it in the parking lot. You might, as the CEO, you might want to have kind of a secret handshake or something with your chair so that they know when you're giving them the hard stare or elbowing them in the ribs, it means that we need to move on to the next agenda item. You can also, as the CEO, it's okay to speak up on these things. You've just got to make sure it doesn't look like you're taking over the facilitation from the chair. So you might want to have a few good phrases in hand, and any facilitator is going to want to have these as well as the CEO. Things like, you know, I know it's important that many of you are going to have to get out the door promptly at 4 o'clock today, so I want to be respectful of your time. We're already 10 minutes over on this agenda item, and often that's all it takes to get people back on track. Also keep in mind with your agendas, don't make the agenda unremittingly heavy. Remember, people are putting brain work into this, and particularly if it's a longer board meeting, if you make it too heavy, they're just going to get frustrated and burned out partway through, and you're not going to get the answers and decisions that you need. So make sure that if you've got a long agenda, it's broken up with easy things, fun things, easy decisions to make, positive reports that you can say, look, here's the good news. This committee's done great things. This is what we've accomplished. Make sure that for every long item, there's at least a few short items which are demonstrating successes and can help people get their energy back again to move back to that maybe harder decision or more difficult conversation. Now, keep in mind too, what keeps directors motivated and what keeps them engaged, because that's part of the relationship. You can't have a strong and thriving relationship with directors that simply aren't engaged or motivated. They just don't care. So remember, go back to those short-term successes. You need to make sure that your directors has the opportunity for short-term, easy wins, so they've got something to build confidence and to make them feel empowered. Committees, you want to make sure that they've got enough rope to be able to go out there and feel they are empowered, but they've got very clear instructions and the opportunity to have very quick wins that they can report back to the board. Directors want to know that they've contributed. I mean, that's why they became a director in the first place. And short-term wins really help them feel very tangibly that they've contributed to the organization. Keep in mind too that the best way to motivate your members and your directors are when challenges occur. When a terrible issue comes up, it's often the best way to get everybody engaged because everybody is of the same opinion. This is terrible. We got to do something about it. So use challenges and also opportunities to get everybody engaged. This is a great opportunity. Maybe it's a great opportunity to support the organization. Maybe it's a great opportunity to support a much-loved stakeholder. Maybe it's a great opportunity to get out into the community and get more visibility for the organization. And also make sure that every director feels that they've got accountability. If I, as a director, walk away from a board meeting and there's really nothing I have to do between now and the next board meeting other than, you know, read the board package, I'm not going to feel as engaged as if I've got some accountability, something I have to come back with next time. Maybe it's because I sit on one or more committees. Maybe it's because I've taken on a task that I've got to report back to the board on, but make sure every single director has individual accountability. Now, I want to end back at the beginning, which is with director recruitment. Remember, we talked about onboarding the new CEO. Let's talk about things to think about when you're bringing new directors on board. First of all, make sure that you have a policy and a process for bringing new directors on board. Just like anything else, remember when I said earlier, if you've got good planning and you've got good processes, it solves an awful lot of problems before they actually occur. If you've got a policy about how people get on the board and you've got a process to follow, it's going to really relieve friction. It's going to make people believe things are transparent. There's an open playing field. And it's also going to be a very simple checklist that your nominations committee can follow, and it makes it easier for them as well. So What you need to have here is really four things. You need outreach, you need vetting, you need interviews, and you need a recommendation to the board. So outreach means we want to have public outreach. Everybody on your membership needs to know that you're recruiting for the board. That can be something that just happens behind the scenes. You also want to have private outreach. Once that public outreach has gone out, you need to know who are the candidates that you think would be great for the board of directors. Ideally, your nominations committee has already got a pipeline going here, and you already have a list of people that you think would be great to have on the board. Now, the nominations committee can reach out to them and say, hey, your name came up. We're looking for a director. The call has just gone out. I really encourage you to put your name in for a position on the board. And even if they don't want to do it this time, it might make them think more seriously about doing it next time you actually have a director vacancy. Keep in mind that some of the people you want to reach out to are going to be people on your committees, because committees are a great way to find out who are the doers. You very quickly find out in a committee who are the people that will actually put up their hand to take on a responsibility, and which of those people actually come back having done that responsibility. They definitely fit into both camps. Some people are serial volunteers, but not serial doers. And it helps to know that when you're making a decision about somebody coming onto a board. The vetting that the nominations committee is going to be doing, remember when you do that outreach, you're asking them to put in an application. So regardless of what you ask them for on that application, and at a minimum, it should be a short bio and a reason why they want to get onto the board's going to review those applications and decide who's on the short list. From there, they're going to interview everyone they put in their short list, because there's things that you are going to get from a conversation that you are not going to get from just looking at an application. Keep in mind when it comes to interviews, if you have more people that have applied than are actually on your short list, but it's still not too many people, do people the courtesy of giving them an interview anyways. People, if they've applied, it's nice not only to be able to acknowledge them. Yes, we got your application. That's wonderful. But make sure that they know, for everyone who applied, this is what we've got. Here's the next steps. You may be contacted for an interview. If people are contacted for an interview, they feel like they've at least been considered, that they were heard. So the more people you can interview, the better. And you might actually discover that they're actually much better in the interview than they were in terms of their application. But what you're going to get from the interviews, amongst other things, you have the opportunity to have questions in the interview that's going to help you understand whether this person is capable and comfortable thinking from a big picture and strategic perspective. It's not easy for everybody. There's some really smart, really capable people that is a real struggle for. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't bring them onto the board, but it helps to know that in advance, because you know more training and more professional development is going to be needed to help them to live up to their potential. Finally, and most importantly of all for director recruitment, your nominations committee should be a year-round group, where what they're doing when there isn't a vacancy on the board of directors is they're looking for ways to build the pipeline. They're constantly talking to people, at member meetings, at committees, keeping their eyes out for people that would be good, encouraging them to think about getting onto the board, especially when you've got new and younger people coming in as members. They may not be interested right now. They may need to learn more about the organization, but plant that seed right from the get-go and make sure that you're tracking it. Make sure the nominations committee literally has a tracking sheet of all the people that are in the pipeline that you feel are possibilities for the board of directors. So I've given you a number of ideas. As always, I'm going to encourage you, don't get overwhelmed by what you're not doing or what you think you should be doing. If you feel there's some ideas here that are going to help, and I believe there really are, choose one, start it immediately. And if you got to park something else to get that one thing done, just do it and move forward. You'll definitely get benefit from it. So in summary, we talked about 6 different things. We talked about onboarding the new CEO, making sure that you've got a plan to do that. We talked about some ideas for the CEO to build relationships with individual directors, as well as the chair and the treasurer, making sure that the CEO and the board of directors know their roles. How do you put together a really good agenda and manage meetings well to make it super easy on the chair and ensure a really good outcome? How do you make sure that your board directors are motivated and engaged? And back to the beginning, how do you make sure you've got the right people on the board in the first place? So in terms of your next steps, you want to make sure that you're building and maintaining bonds with your board of directors. that you are alert for challenges and opportunities that are going to give you an opportunity to engage board members and members alike. Make sure that you remember that your volunteers are human beings. So stoke their passionate fires and pump their tires. Give them a pat on the back every time it is reasonable to do so, and be sincere about it. Keep the energy flowing. If there are things you'd like help with, like facilitator training or governance training or support for your leaders, you know where to find us. So let's get into the questions. Kevin, what's our first question?
So our first question is, how can we make the board more independent for reporting purposes? They always seem to be looking to us for what to say.
You know, I think that's a really good point. And I was trying to touch on that earlier when I was talking about the treasurer. That's a really good example. Often, we just aren't putting enough effort into briefing board members in order to do their own reporting. Now, I know as the CEO, it takes you literally more time to brief someone to do a good job and sound like they know what they're talking about than it does to do it yourself. But if you do it yourself, it becomes like Charlie Brown's school teacher. All they're hearing is your voice, mwah, 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 mwah. You want to make sure that your directors are able to do that reporting. And by doing that, you are actually also building bonds with them, because when you train a director how to do really good reporting, to understand things, then they are able to answer questions. And it's not just you on the spot. You actually have people who are on the same page as you, who understand things in the same way that you do. So basically, brief them well, do it in advance on an ongoing basis, make sure they feel comfortable before they go into the board meeting, that they know what they're doing. And also try to delegate as much reporting as you can. Anything that's reasonable, try to delegate. That builds engagement with your board members. I'm just looking at, we have a question I see live on the Q&A. And this is what we were just talking about, the vetting stage of recruitment. Yeah, it does look like a job interview. Would it be the case to ask a candidate about their vision, what they can bring to the board, what their time commitment? Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. Basically, what you're doing in the vetting stage, the nominations committee is first of all looking at the applications. So that's part of the vetting. You know, if we've got somebody that's not even an active member, they don't get to be on the board of directors. So you're going to have a rubric that you go through as you vet the applications. Assuming they meet the basics of the applications, now you're in a process where you can decide on the short list as a nominations committee, and then you go to the interview. So yeah, it does work like a job interview. Think about what kind of questions you want to be asking there. It could be, what do they see as the vision of the organization? Or do they feel that the vision of the organization aligns with what it should be? What are the specific skills and talents they can bring to the board? Hopefully they put that already in their nomination form, and if they have, drilled down on it. So yeah, great point and great question. Thank you, Tim. What's our next question, Kevin?
So our next question is, how do we prevent board complacency?
I think really where this comes back to is engagement. Complacency leads to a lack of engagement. How do you make sure that engagement is ongoing? I think there's a couple of things to think about here. A couple of tips I would give you is, first of all, go back to the quick wins. Make sure that every board member has accountability for something, but make sure that what every board member has accountability for is not something that is only ever going to be solved 10 years from now. That can be a real enthusiasm killer. So when you give people tasks on an ongoing basis, when the board gives direction, or you as the CEO ask for help, think about giving people tasks where some of them are big picture ongoing things, and some of them are things where they can get a really quick win, do some research, come back to the board with a recommendation, and look good without spending a whole lot of time on it. And making sure that each director has specific accountability, that is really important.
All right, our next question is, how can I keep the board motivated to continue working towards its strategic goals?
Okay, that's a really good question, and it is related. Assuming you've got a really good strategic plan and the board has responsibilities in terms of making that strategic plan happen, in addition to the things that we talked about earlier about each director having specific tasks and ensuring that everybody has a chance at a quick win, make sure that you are having regular reference back to your strategic goals and reminding people why you put those goals together. Sometimes people just get bored after a while of looking at the goals over and over again. You can have your strategic plan as an attachment to every single board meeting, but is everybody actually going to read it? What I really like is one of two things. Either on a quarterly basis, you have a regular update of where you are with a strategic plan, and you ask the people that were responsible for different areas of the strategic plan to provide their reports. I think that's about the right cadence to do a full review of where you are in the strategic plan. But the challenge with that is if you have people who are responsible for doing things during that quarter, and they don't start doing them until, oh my God, there's a board meeting and I'm going to have to provide a report, it doesn't give them enough time to do it. And often what happens at that quarterly meeting is it's a bit of a downer because nobody's actually done anything. So what I think is appropriate here is that if you have quarterly update meetings, you also have regular check-in calls with the CEO and staff about how particular directors' tasks are going so that they're reminded and they know that they're approaching a deadline so that they've got time to actually turn things around.
Aaron, our next question is there any advice that you could offer on officers getting together without the board and slipping into an executive committee role?
You know, that is a really good question. And, you know, what I have often heard when this happens, it happens because somebody, usually the then current chair or president, feels like it's important for them to be constantly having dialogue with their peers, the other officers. And it's portrayed often as, oh, I was just touching base with so-and-so, and then we figured, well, we better have somebody else on the call because they'll provide. And all of a sudden, you know, we're having a great conversation, but we forgot to invite the CEO. I think it's very important in the training part to make sure that everybody understands that if you have an executive committee, you need to understand why an executive committee would be meeting and what the parameters are of the executive committee meeting. And if there's going to be an executive committee meeting, the CEO should be at the executive committee meeting just like they are at board meetings. The only time you should have members of the board of directors meeting without the CEO is if you have a policy to have in-camera sessions at your board meetings. So this really becomes a matter of training, and it's almost like, you know, this is governance, this is not operations. You need to remind people that this is not the way we want to approach things. Now, if you're the CEO, that's a challenge because people think, oh, you're just talking your book. You're feeling uncomfortable that you were excluded. It definitely does come down to training on an ongoing basis.
Right. Next question is, what is the best way to ensure that the understanding of the division of duties is clear?
I think what we're asking here is, are we asking the division of duties between the board and the CEO? I think that's what it is. So that's what I'm going to answer. There's a couple of things that I would suggest here. I mean, obviously training helps. And I really encourage you in that annual training, use case studies. Because remember, we said earlier, sometimes it can be very easy to get into a gray area where, yeah, this is operations, but maybe the board should be at least talking a bit about it. So having that training with case studies is really useful, and use those case studies to cover the gray area. You know, how do we know when we're clearly in board area? When have we gone into gray area? And when have we dropped off the edge of the cliff? Case studies really help. Constant reminders may or may not help, but maybe they have to be done. But maybe what you can do here is consider having a governance watchdog. So somebody whose role actually is to sit at those board of directors meetings and be on the watch for where the board is heading outside of their role. They're heading down into the operations area, or maybe it's a point of order in terms of how something is being discussed. Maybe it's an agenda item. We're going over time with the agenda item. If you've got somebody who really is a bit of a wonk about governance and even Robert's rules, the Carver model, whatever it is that you're following, if you can get somebody who wants to do that at board meetings, that would be wonderful. If you can get that person out, get them trained, and have them in that role, that takes so much pressure off the CEO. And it's also really valuable training for them as well. Now, for that reason, sometimes you could argue it's a better idea to have a staff member doing that. A couple of problems with that. If it is a staff member, there might be times when it's not appropriate for the staff to be in the board meeting. And the other consideration is that if it is a volunteer and you take the time and possibly the money to train them, what happens when they leave the board? Is this going to be an ongoing source of training to make somebody a governance watchdog? If it is, think about that. That makes a lot of sense.
All right, next question is, what are some tips on how to get the board feeling connected and to feel ownership of the association/organization? How to ignite that fire?
I really feel that invariably when somebody gets on a board of directors, it tends to be for one of two reasons. Either they're on the board of directors because they want to know what the hell's going on behind the scenes, and and they really need to know that because they're a little bit concerned about the way the direction of the organization is going. The other reason, and this typically is more likely, is they feel really passionately about some aspect of what the organization is doing, and they want to get more involved in pursuing that thing that they feel really passionate about. So that is one of the reasons why it's really helpful to have regular one-to-one conversations with each member of your board of directors. Find out what their passion is. And then when you're looking for a volunteer, you're going to know, wow, Tammy is the one I need to reach out to here because I know she's super passionate about that. That will also help to ensure that things actually get done between board meetings. So stoke the passions, know who's passionate about what, and make sure that you're directing assignments in the direction of the people that have the most passion for that. When you are giving a board member an assignment, make sure that they've got a certain amount of autonomy. If they feel they can't even open their mouth without getting the approval of the CEO, they're not going to feel like they really want to do it. So make sure that the board has given them autonomy within certain boundaries. You can do whatever you like within these boundaries, just don't cross these boundaries. Give them some autonomy. And if you have the opportunity to get your board members in front of, your board directors in front of members regularly, that's a good thing as well too. Because when they're talking to members, they're going to find out what members are happy about, what members are pissed off about. And when they hear from their peers, that really resonates with them. So another way of keeping them engaged is to get them out in front of the members and connecting with members, networking with members, and hearing what members have to say.
All right, next question is, do you have any ideas for the board agenda to keep things strategic versus too operational?
Yeah, as you know, this is one of my favorite topics. And yes, please pay attention to the slide. And by the way, these slides are available. I'm happy to send them to you. Please pay attention to the slide that has the agenda suggestions on it. If you've got a really good agenda where all of the deliverables for each agenda item are there, every agenda item has the timing on it, and we have made sure that the board agenda in itself is actually 80% or more strategic rather than operational, that is going to do wonders for stopping the board from getting too operational. And again, also good facilitation. The chair is in a position to be able to say, okay, yeah, that's a great point. Let's take that back to the CEO to discuss with the staff because we're clearly getting into the operations here. So having a good facilitator who knows what they're doing and making sure that you've got a really good agenda. Those would be the two things that I would pay the most attention to in the short term.
All right, and the last question is, I'm a board member on a community organization who's in the process of hiring a new CEO. How can we start the relationship right?
Excellent question. And if you go back to the very first part of our webinar, when we were talking about onboarding the CEO, the best thing that you can do is to make sure that you've got a really good onboarding plan for the CEO, that was done well ahead of time. Remember, you can do it now. If your CEO is going to be there another 10 years, no worries. Just keep updating it every year and improving on it. By the time they leave, you're going to have an awesome onboarding plan. So make sure you've got an onboarding plan and make sure that both the board and the staff are involved in the onboarding plan. Remember, as a director, your role doesn't end once you've hired the CEO. You need to be part of the onboarding. Do we have any more questions, Kevin?
Nope, that was the last one.
Okay, wonderful. Well, if you want a copy of the slides, just reach out. We're happy to send those to you. Our next event is on April 11th. I'm going to be interviewing Gerald Bram of Bram Research. There's a really interesting report out right now that has been commissioned by CSAE, the Canadian Society of Association Executives, the Membership Trends Report. Really interesting information in there, and we're going to share that with you on April 11th. Kevin will be following up with you as usual for your feedback. If you've got any ideas for topics that you'd like us to address in these webinars, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much and see you next month.